Last week, I said it was impossible. This week, I'm mocking trades where the Mets are going to land Tarik Skubal.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the number one daily podcast of the New York Mets. Want to find any of my written work on the team, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Now, last week, I did a show which was titled, Will one of the best pitchers on the planet get traded? Are Skubal and Skeens real trade targets? So my conclusion on the show was, no, these were not real trade targets, particularly Skeens, and you can go back and watch or listen to that show to hear all my reasons on that. But I also spent as much time saying that Skubal was not going to be traded this offseason. And my reason for that was because the Tigers are nothing without Tarik Skubal. The Tigers are not a playoff team without Skubal. And with Skubal over the last 2 years, they've made the playoffs in back-to-back seasons, ending a 10-year playoff drought. So I really just did not see a world, especially coming off of, I think at the time, the Tigers were just eliminated. We had just seen Skubal pitch in an elimination game and watched him absolutely carve. And so I saw that game. I saw the buzz coming on Skubal getting traded. And I've been getting a lot of comments about Skubal and Skeens and how the Mets should be targeting these guys. And so I did that show, and I really did feel at the time that Skubal was going to get moved. And I still ultimately lean towards that camp, but a lot has changed over the past week, and it's because the noise has gotten really loud, and largely because Jon Heyman wrote a clickbait story in the New York Post. And I say it's clickbait because the title says, Tigers staring down $250 million gap in Tarik Skubal contract talk. Now, that headline makes you think that they were just in the negotiating room and there's a huge gap. But that does not fully illustrate what's going on. That leaves a lot of context set aside. So when there was contract talks, this came before this past season. And I'll read from the story here. Let me just get into the open here. The Tigers and superstar Tarik Skubal have a lot of work to do if they're going to bridge quite possibly the biggest gap in MLB negotiating history, an estimated $250 million. Yep, that's not a misprint. It's close to $250 million. Heyman continues. Word is, a year ago, the Tigers offered Skubal well less than the $170 million deal signed a bit later by Garrett Crochet. While there's no belief Skubal named his price, his obvious comp is Garrett Cole, who signed 6 years ago for a record $324 million, with prices up, and he highlights Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander's contracts with the Mets, where they made over $43 million a season, and Juan Soto making $51 million. All of that, I'm sure, maybe was pointed out. But to Scott, or from Scott Boras to Heyman may include some of these numbers in here. The baseline ask for Skubal is seen as $400 million. So that's the baseline ask. And the contract previously was well less than $170 million. Bing, bang, boom, $250,000 gap. Let's print it. Let's go. And then everyone's run with it. Now, there has been some follow-up reporting from Evan Petzold of the Detroit Free Press. He said that last year, the offer that Heyman's referring to was a 4-year deal worth less than $100 million, which would cover his final 2 years of arbitration, 2025 and 2026, and his first 2 years of free agency. So you might say, man, even 4 years and $100 million is insane. Why do they even put that on the table? Well, Skubal made a little over $10 million this past season. Now, he pretty much is guaranteed to win another Cy Young, and so now his projected arbitration for this year by Spotrac is at $22.5 million. But let's just say you're projecting a $6 million bump. So let's just say the Tigers at the time would have projected that over his final 2 years of arbitration, he was going to make $26 million. And then let's say they actually put $95 million on the table. Well, now you're getting close to $35 million a year, which is less insulting, but ultimately you can understand why Skubal wanted no part of that contract, continues to bet on himself. He's a Boris client, so Boris always wants these guys to get to free agency, and he goes out, performs, wins another Cy Young, most likely, and so now he's in position for one, to see his salary double in arbitration, and two, he is sitting pretty to hit free agency after one more season and get a monster contract. What we don't know is what Tigers ownership is planning to do with Tarik Skubal. How do they feel about the situation? Because as much as we can talk about GM Scott Harris and what he wants to do, when it comes to a player of Skubal's magnitude, this is an ownership decision. Ownership is going to decide if they think that they should get out in front of a Skubal departure, knowing that they're never going to pay him in free agency, and they give Harris the go-ahead to shop Skubal and try to trade him now. Or they're going to say, let's take another shot with Skubal. Let's retool around him. If we're out of it by the deadline, maybe we'll revisit it. But no, we want Skubal to be the face of the Tigers. We want Skubal to be the one that we're going to be selling season tickets with, having Skubal as the face of that, having Skubal as the headliner for this team. And we're going to try to get an AL Central title, get back in the playoffs, and see if Skubal can lead us to a World Series. And we'll collect all that playoff revenue. And then you give him the qualifying offer, and we'll see what happens. It really is an ownership decision on what the Tigers are going to do. And I mentioned this on the show I did on Saturday, I believe, where I started to talk about the fact that we were going to have to do another Skubal show. And I said, look, over the past 2 years, the Tigers are 42-20 with Tarik Skubal on the mound. They're 131 and 131 without him on the mound. So they're a 500 team when he doesn't start. When he does start, that's why they've been a playoff team the last 2 years. So if you trade him, you're not going to win this upcoming season. It's very unlikely. You are probably shifting your focus to 2027. Now, on the show that I did a week ago, I talked about Nolan McLean. And I said that if a trade was going to get done, McLean would have to be in the deal. The reason I said that is because I promise you that's what Scott Harris would ask for. Nolan McLean would be number one on the list. That's who he would want, because if you get McLean, you get an ace for the future and an ace for the present for the 2026 Detroit Tigers, and you might have a chance to still make the playoffs. But as I said on that show last week, there's no world where David Stearns is going to trade Nolan McLean for a pitcher in his walk year. It's not happening, and that's why I thought that it would be a non-starter. But if you look at where the Tigers are at as a franchise, you look at Kevin McGonigal, the top prospect in baseball, according to us at Just Baseball, as well as other outlets, who will be your shortstop of the future, probably starts on opening day to try to get out in front of that PPI, and if he wins Rookie of the Year, you get a draft pick. I think McGonigal will be a huge part of the 2026 Tigers, but it's going to be his rookie season. Max Clark, Jose Briseño, both of these guys are on the way. They were also in AA at the end of the season. Really talented prospects. Jackson Jobe got Tommy John surgery in June, I believe. So you can look at this young core that is in the works. You can look at some of the pieces on your current roster and say, you know what? 2027 is our year. Let's make a trade now that will still be competitive this season. We might still be able to sneak into the playoffs, especially in the AL Central. But let's get max value for Tarik Skubal right now. Let's not even worry about going to free agency with this, because the fan base is going to hate us if we don't sign him. If we're never going to sign him for that astronomical contract that he's due to get, then let's just make a deal now and make the best possible use of this asset. So if that actually happens, if Skubal in his walk year with Boris as his agent and the Tigers knowing that they are never going to meet his asking price, which I still think they should just pay the guy, honestly. I know they can't sign an extension most likely, but I would just ride this thing out and then try to sign him in free agency because he's already expressed that he would want to come back. If everything was equal, he's got to make his money. But what we're going to do in the next segment here is we're going to play out the hypothetical that they decide that they want to maximize the asset and they're looking more towards 2027. And with that in mind, which Mets prospects would you hold on to? Which ones would you make untouchable for the best pitcher on the planet right now? Unless you think the best pitcher on the planet is Paul Skeens, one of the best too. So we're going to go through those options in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like catching a game live, the energy, the crowd, the chance to see your team in person. But how do you actually get those tickets to get in the ballpark? That's the tough part. Between queues, login screens, surprise fees, all of that can take the fun out of going to the game. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Game Time is fast, it's easy, it's backed by the Game Time guarantee. So you're always going to get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included. So the price you see is the price you pay. The app made it super simple. I could even see my view from my seat before I bought, so I know exactly what to expect when I arrive. And zone deals are your way to get even more savings because Game Time will pick your seats and you save big, but you do pick the section. Honestly, it's faster, it's cheaper. It's the least stressful way to get into the game. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, use that promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. We're inching closer and closer. Really do appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. As we talk about players that would interest the Tigers, I want to start off this segment by shouting out Elizabeth Benge, who put together the best trade proposal I've ever seen on SNY. Elizabeth used to work for the Mets in their major league ops, and now I guess she's working for SNY. So here's her trade proposal. Brandon Sproat, Jet Williams, Ryan Clifford, and Nick Morabito for Tarik Skubal. That's a lot to give up. It's a top 30 prospect in baseball in Jet Williams. Brandon Sproat, still a top 100 prospect, according to some outlets. I know just baseball, we still have him on the top 100. Plug and play starting pitcher for them. Ryan Clifford, he might be on some top 100s. I think for the most part, he's not quite a top 100 prospect, but 30 home run upside, a guy that's up in AAA already. And Nick Morabito had a solid season in AA, and he's off to a great start in the Arizona Fall League. He is Rule 5 draft eligible this winter, so that might be a guy the Mets are more willing to trade because otherwise they probably have to add him to their 40 or they run the risk of him getting selected in that Rule 5 draft. I think that's a pretty fair trade package for Skubal. You hang on to Nolan, McLean, you hang on to Carson, Benge, and that's the most important thing. Those are the two untouchables in any trade this offseason. Carson, Benge is your center fielder of the future. Nolan, McLean is right now your ace of the future and even the ace of your present. You need Nolan McLean next year. You're not trading 6 years of McLean for 1 year of Skubal. So those guys I'm already taking off the table, like Liz Ben did. But I also wanted to pull this from Will Salmon's reporting in The Athletic. He talked to some industry sources unaffiliated with the club. So he said, just to provide a general idea, one industry source unaffiliated with the club speculated Detroit may look to ask for 2 top-level starting pitchers and a position player prospect. He then said in Mets parlance, that means something like Tong, Sproat, and Jet Williams. Now, I would not give up those 3 prospects in the same trade. For me, I would not trade Tong and Sproat in the same deal. It would be Tong or Sproat. I'm not giving up 2 of my top 3 pitching prospects because ultimately, if Skubal's ask in free agency gets to a place that the Mets don't want to meet him at, or if he gets hurt, whatever it is, to give up Tong and Sproat, you're giving up too much of your future. So I would not do that. But then continue on with what Will Salmon writes. He said the Mets farm system ranks among the league's best. but such a demand would significantly compromise its health. Perhaps it takes less or involves a major league player or two. Teams in recent years haven't exactly received jaw-dropping returns for players entering their walk years. So let's talk about a couple trades for players in their walk years. Corbin Burnes was an ace, got traded from the Brewers to the Orioles. The Orioles got DL Hall, Joey Ortiz, and a comp pick. That comp pick turned into Blake Burke, who is a 22-year-old first baseman, finished last season in Double-A, hit 11 home runs in 37 games, had a 956 OPS. He has a chance to pop this upcoming season, but still right now not really considered one of the top 10 or maybe even top 15 prospects in the Brewers system. But still, it was a comp pick, so a pick that was after the first round, which is very valuable to teams. DL Hall was previously a top 100 prospect, a very live and electric left-handed arm that the Brewers hoped that they could turn into a quality starting pitcher for them. Hasn't quite worked out due to injuries, which has kind of always been DL Hall's issue. And then Joey Ortiz, who, yes, he had a bad season this year as their starting shortstop, had a great first season where I don't think he quite made the All-Star team, but he played at an All-Star level, I believe, in that first half and then fizzled a little bit in the second half. Joey Ortiz did not have the best of seasons, but remember, he was a top 100 prospect at the time. So you had a current top 100 prospect, a guy that was a top 100 prospect who had graduated in DL Hall, and a comp pick. That is still a lot to trade for Corbin Burnes. I know so far the return hasn't been that outstanding, but you never know what's going to happen with Blake Burke. You never know what the next 4 years of Joey Ortiz looks like, and we'll see if DL Hall can ever reclaim some of his value. Juan Soto got traded from the Padres to the Yankees. That deal was Soto and Trent Grisham for Michael King, Johnny Brito, Randy Vasquez, Drew Thorpe, and Kyle Higashioka. Michael King had proven at the end of the 2023 season that he was a viable starting pitcher with a lot of upside. Drew Thorpe was the top pitching prospect in the Yankee system, a top 100 prospect who later got flipped for Dylan Cease. Johnny Brito and Randy Vasquez represented some MLB depth for their starting rotation, guys that had options, so that gave them some flexibility. But for the Padres, who just needed some arms, that was that part of the trade, and then they got a catcher in Higashioka. Now, if you were to look at these two trades, I think one thing that stands out, these were still, I mean, you had a 5-for-2 with the Yankees Soto trade, and then a 3-for-1 in the Corbin Burnes trade. I think to get Skubal, it would be a 4-for-1. I think it's 4 prospects or prospects and players for Skubal. And when it comes to what's untouchable in my eyes, I mentioned McLean, I mentioned Carson, Benge, and I'm even going to go out on a limb and say Jet Williams. And the reason I'm saying that is because, as Will Salmon talked about, 2 arms and 2 position players. That was what he said, right? He said, I should have said 2 top-level starting pitchers and a position player prospect. So pitching is going to be the thing that the Tigers really want because they have really good hitters in their system. So with the hitters they already have, I'm not putting Jet Williams on the table. I'm not, because the arms are what's going to motivate them. And I'm not giving up both Tong and Sproat in this deal. So those are my qualifiers. And the Mets have a lot of other arms to choose from beyond just Tong and Sproat. They got Jack Wenninger and Jonathan Santucci, who each had really outstanding success in Double-A. Both could start the season in Triple-A. I think Wenninger will. Santucci might get a little more seasoning in Double. Will Watson ended the year in Double-A. Zach Thornton ended the year in Double-A. RJ Gordon had a really good season. I believe he ended the year in High-A. But regardless, there's a handful of starting pitching prospects the Mets have that could be included with a Tong or a Sproat to get a deal moving in the right direction. And position player prospects outside of Jet and Benge, the 2 guys that I'm talking about a lot on these mock trade episodes, Ryan Clifford and Jacob Reimer, a couple of big bats in the Mets system. You also have Nick Morabito, who, again, Liz Benz shouted out or put in her mock trade. And then you have AJ Ewing, who I think is a fringe top 100 prospect right now. And I think he is, in my eyes, a better prospect than Morabito, but you could put him on the table if that was the difference to get a deal done. So what I want to do in the final segment, I'm going to give you a prospect-laden package and then a prospect plus major leaguer package, 2 mock trades. that would land the Mets Tarik Skubal, and I'll discuss whether they are worth it. So we'll go through all of that in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season's here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and you're going to get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you're going to unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, whether it's player props, building a same-game parlay, even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes watching football even more exciting. You got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or you love diving into the stats, FanDuel is going to make the game day experience that much better. It's quick, it's easy, it's the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service. We get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. And the line graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, for my trade package to get Skubal, I'm going to borrow from Liz Ben's package. I'm going to include Ryan Clifford and Nick Morabito as the two position players the Mets are going to trade in this deal. So I got Clifford and Morabito. With Clifford, 30 home run upside. They have Spencer Torkelson, Detroit does, for the next 3 years. But Clifford could be their first baseman in the future. And with the up and down nature of Torres' career up to this point, I don't think he's stopping you from trading for a first baseman who has a ton of power potential. And you could always stick Ryan Clifford into a corner spot in the outfield as well. So I think he would move the needle a lot for the Tigers. But if they wanted Jacob Reimer instead of Ryan Clifford, while I would prefer trading Clifford over Reimer, I'm not going to let Jacob Reimer hold up this deal. If they wanted Jacob Reimer, I would include Jacob Reimer. Now, Nick Morabito had a good season in Double-A. Not a great season, a good season. He had 273, got on base to a 348 clip, slugged at a 385 clip. Slugging is not his game. He stole 49 bases on 60 attempts. Again, he is Rule 5 draft eligible, so that makes him a little more expendable to the Mets. But he's playing in the Arizona Fall League right now, and he is standing out. In 6 games so far, he's hitting 391, 517 on base, 522 slug, a double, a triple, 2 homers already, and he's stolen 6 bases. So Morabito is off to a torrid start. He's boosting his trade stock. So is Chris Suero, but I want to talk about Suero on another episode later on this week because I really like Suero, and we might do at the end of this week an updated top 10, if not a top 15 prospects in the Mets system. And I'll see if Suero can make that list. But getting back to Morabito gives the Tigers a center fielder that they could plug onto their 40-man roster right now, fourth outfielder type, a lot of speed, somebody that I could see AJ Hinch deploying with all the substitutions and things that they make with their big league roster. Headliner in the trade, though, is not Ryan Clifford. It's not Morabito or even Jacob Reimer. The headliner is Jonah Tong. Now, it could be Jonah Tong or Brandon Sproat. And maybe you almost look at it as if it's Tong, you get away with Clifford as the top bat. If it's Sproat, then maybe you can, juice it a little bit, juice the package by going Reimer instead of Clifford. But here's my point. I would trade one of Tong or Sproat, including also one of Reimer or Clifford. I'm not giving up both Clifford and Reimer. I'm not giving up both Tong and Sproat if I was going to make a deal with the Tigers. Because, again, this is a pitcher in his walk year. He just happens to be the best pitcher in baseball over the last 2 years. Brandon Sproat is the guy that I think the Mets would prefer to trade. The fact that Jonah Tong got promoted first, I think, speaks volumes to how much they believe in him. He struck out 40.5% of the batters that he faced in the minor leagues this season. He pitched to a 1.43 ERA. Now, he might not be ready to help at the beginning of 2026, but he's going to be ready at some point in 2026. He needs to work on some things. He has to get a third pitch. He has to continue to build confidence in that changeup. There are still things that need to be worked on, but Jonah Tong has a fastball that could get him to a very high level in the big leagues. He has an elite fastball that, if paired with a proper arsenal, could be devastating in Major League Baseball. Jonah Tong moves the needle. Doesn't move the needle as much as Nolan McLean, but the Mets aren't going to put McLean on the table. So Tong is the piece that I think would really get the Tongers would really get the Tigers interested. Now, you have to add another arm, but I'm not going to add Sproat. Like I said, I'm not going to put both those guys on the table. I also would want to hold on to Jonathan Santucci because his upside to me is a little bit higher than the rest of the guys in that tier below the Mets' top 3 pitching prospects of McLean, Tong, and Sproat. You then get to Santucci, Jack Weninger, Will Watson, Zach Thornton, RJ Gordon. For me, I'd want to hang on to Santucci and Weninger, but again, we're talking about how far would I go? I would put Weninger on the table. Jack Weninger had a great season in AA. Jack Weninger carved in the playoffs. So that's not an easy pill to swallow to give him up in this trade too, but you have to think about what you're hanging on to. You're hanging on to McLean. You're hanging on to Sproat. So your rotation in 2026 is Tarik Skubal, Nolan McLean, Clay Holmes, Sean Manaea, David Peterson, Kodai Senga, Brandon Sproat, Christian Scott. It's a pretty good 1 through 8 on your depth chart. What you're giving up, again, the best package I would do. Jonah Tong, Jack Weninger, Ryan Clifford, and Nick Morabito, or Brandon Sproat, Jack Weninger, Jacob Reimer, Nick Morabito. Either one. I think they're very similar packages. And again, you're getting Skubal for just 2026. But Skubal and the Tigers won 21 of his 31 starts this past year. Imagine you plug that into the Mets rotation this past season. A guy that, let's pull up the stats again. I know I talked about it last week, but just to reiterate. Tarik Skubal had a 2.41 ERA and struck out 241 batters. His whip was 0.89, and he was awesome in October too. You could ride Tarik Skubal to the first World Series championship since 1986. That's 40 years. And then you can make him love being a Met, so when it comes to free agency, you have the inside track to keeping him. It's a lot to give up. It really is. You could probably trade 60 cents on that dollar to get Freddie Peralta. But again, when I lay out the scenario for the Tigers, I think you have to hit them over the top to get a deal done because ultimately I still think their best course of action. If I was hosting Locked On Tigers, I would be screaming at the top of my lungs not to trade Skubal. Ride out one last season. If you lose them, you lose them because you never know if the prospects you trade for them are going to work out anyway. Take your shot at the qualifying offer, worst case scenario. Or if your team sucks for the first half, you can trade him for probably even more at the deadline than you trade for him right now. Or that you get for him right now. That's what I would do. That's as far as I would go. And it's not a decision I would make lightly. Giving up Jonah Tong is tough. That's tough. Having to throw in Jack Weninger, Ryan Clifford, and Nick Morabito in that deal, that's a really hard trade to make. But you have the other pitching prospects in your system to account for the loss of Tong and Weninger. You have a Jacob Reimer. You have an AJ Ewing as other guys with similar skill sets beyond Ryan Clifford and Nick Morabito. And again, Reimer and Ewing are, in my eyes, better prospects than Clifford and Morabito. So by giving up Jonah Tong, you would be holding on to, I think, some of the position players you don't want to give up. And remember, you're also keeping Benge and Jet Williams in this scenario. If they want Jet Williams and one of those top pitching prospects, I'm saying no, because you can sign Skubal in a year and you can trade for Freddie Peralta right now without giving up those guys. And you can ride Freddie Peralta for a season. Hopefully it works. And if it doesn't, well, now it's time to get Skubal in free agency. They waited out Juan Soto and got him. Remember that. There is a strong argument to be made that the Mets should not even try to make this trade because they are sitting in such a good spot with their system and they can make other moves. They can sign Dylan Cease and not give up a single prospect. Now, Dylan Cease, Freddie Peralta, these guys are not Tarik Skubal. That's why I still would probably make the move. But it's a tough one to make. Now, here's a trade that's going to have some MLB players in it to maybe lighten the prospect burden that you have to give up. I still think you have to probably give up one of Tong or Sproat to get a deal done. I don't think that you can get around that. I honestly don't. That's what they're going to want. But instead of having to give up another talented pitching prospect like a Jack Leninger, you could slide David Peterson in this trade. And I think the Tigers, if they are trying to win in 2026, David Peterson would be intriguing to them because they have nothing in their rotation once they trade Skubal. Granted, they have Casey Mize. It's probably a little bit of an over-exaggeration, but they have Jack Flaherty. I think he'll probably opt into his contract. It's just not a very good rotation. They need MLB starters. It's not a good system either. So David Peterson, who also will be a free agent after the 2026 season, he was an all-star this past season. He was great. He wore down, I think, due to fatigue. But have him pitch in that big ballpark, I think he'd have a lot of success. He's plug and play for them. Jonah, Tong, David Peterson. And then here's where it gets tough for me. Ideally, the other big league piece is a Mark Vientos or a Ronnie Mauricio. If they wanted Brett Beatty, I'd have to think long and hard about it. I don't know. Brett Beatty is your starting third baseman in 2026. You trade him. Now you're left with what? Mauricio and Vientos platooning? I don't really love that. Or you go out and sign a third baseman, but what third baseman are you going to get? Are you going to really pony up and sign Bregman? Probably not. Is it Eugenio Suarez, who's pretty old, having some good moments recently in the playoffs, but he also had a lot of struggles from the deadline up until his monster 2-home run game in the ALCS. Ideally, I think it would not be Brett Beatty. I think it would be one of Mark Vientos or Ronnie Mauricio. And then your fourth piece would be, if it's not Beatty, I'd be even willing to then still trade like a Ryan Clifford. If it is Beatty, then I'd say Morabito or something a little bit lower. For the Tigers, Brett Beatty would be their plug-and-play third baseman. And that's why for them, if they're trying to win this upcoming season, it would make some sense to make the move. You have, what you hope is a future ace in Jonah Tong or Brandon Sproat if they like Sproat more. You get a plug-and-play starter right now in David Peterson, and then you get another bat to slot into your lineup that can be your starting third baseman. I think there are ways the Mets can get a deal done that helps the Tigers win this season. Even a Luis Angel Acuna could have some intrigue to them as a utility man. I think the Mets and the Tigers, if they got on the phone and they really try to hammer something out, they can get a deal done in a multitude of ways. But to answer the title question from the show today, how much is too much for Tarik Skubal? If you're giving up Nolan McLean, if you're giving up Carson Benge, it's too much. Jet Williams, you can talk me into it, but I wouldn't want to trade Jet and one of Sproat or Tong. And the other thing is, if you're trading both of them, that's too much. You have to remember, Skubal will be a free agent. There are other pitchers you can acquire right now for much less, and if you're going to have to pay him anyway, that math problem, it's going to be there in a year. It's not going to get any better by trading for Tarik Skubal. You're not going to get a hometown discount. Trust me, not going to happen. So if you want Skubal more than anything for the future, you play it like you played the Soto sweepstakes and you get him in free agency. If you need him now, if you think that you are a Tarik Skubal away from winning the World Series and you want to push the chips forward, you're going to have to make a trade that hurts. And so I actually think that through talking this out on the show today, I think I'd still lean against trading for Skubal. I really would. Because I just think that cost is going to be so high to get him. I don't think that they're going to cave on the ask and say, all right, we'll take Jack Leninger, Jonathan Santucci, and Jet Williams. I don't think that's going to get it done. I really don't. But you never know until a trade's made. Tomorrow's show, think we're probably going to do the Freddie Peralta thing, and then we might move off of some of these mock trade for starter shows because a lot of them are going to get pretty similar. But I think the Peralta compared to the Skubal comp, it's a good continuation from this conversation because Peralta more likely to be traded in my eyes. Not as good of a pitcher as Tarik Skubal, but I think he can be the start of a really good offseason. So I want to talk about that on tomorrow's show. That's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. Really appreciate all of you for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. You can follow me on social media at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider and be part of our texting service, you can find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day, not for your second watch. Check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports with our local hosts from each team, league hosts from each league. You can find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.